Like the Congressman, I'm born and raised in Orlando, and I'm very committed to my community. I also went to the University of Central Florida, and to be here today to talk about our home state and to amplify what we are seeing on the ground is an opportunity that I do not take for granted. This is a very important topic, examination of anti-democratic abuses of power in the state of Florida. Myself, along with my fellow witnesses, are here to provide that in-depth perspective of what the supermajority Republican Party alongside Governor Ron DeSantis are doing to our state. Actions have compromised the legislative process. They have consolidated power between the three branches of government, eroded individual freedoms, attacked public education, threatened our economy, and a preempted local government authority, which has stripped our neighborhoods and our municipalities from their ability to solve everyday problems. These are not hypothetical threats or hyperboles. In fact, Florida has become ground zero for extremism, and it's important for those of us on the ground to provide that insight to what has become a dangerous trend within Florida's political landscape and our identity. First and foremost, the fundamental principle of democracy lies in the ability of our elected representatives to engage in a fair and transparent legislative process. However, it has become evident that the Republican supermajority in Florida has strayed from this path. Their practices have undermined the democratic foundation upon which our nation stands, leaving many Floridians voiceless and marginalized. They have limited public input, stifled dissenting voices, and pushed through legislation without accurate scrutiny or debate. The sanctity of the legislative process has been compromised, and it's our duty to expose and rectify this injustice. To provide you with a few examples, the Florida House rules for the 2023 legislative session not only continue the process of structured debate, which creates an environment where sometimes we're only given 20 minutes to debate very contentious and important bills on the House floor, but they also added a process to expel members, which we can assume is inspired by what we've seen in other states, but to really create a culture of fear among other colleagues for us not to dissent or call out some of this behavior. The Florida legislature has also denied adequate public testimony on bills, sometimes limiting public testimony in committee to 30 seconds or less for those from the public who come to speak. And perhaps most alarming has been the arrests of citizens expressing the First Amendment rights. Not only have we witnessed more than 24 Floridians be arrested during this past legislative session, which ended in May, simply for expressing the First Amendment rights, but there was a group of activists that threw underwear down to the House floor chamber. I know it's kind of a random thing to throw, but harmless. And now 2 months later, those individuals have had warrants issued for their arrest, and they are actively being arrested in the state right now. Unfortunately, this has become the norm in the so-called free state of Florida. Attacks on the First Amendment have not just impacted individual Floridians, it's also impacted the business sector. As I'm sure many of you have heard, the Florida conservative supermajority has attempted to censor private businesses through policy and intimidation. First, there's House Bill 7 from the 2022 legislative session, which targets the K-12 academic sector, higher education, and the business community in any of their diversity, equity, or inclusion programs, essentially banning them from being able to talk about or prioritize many of these different topics. Fortunately, the federal court has halted this implementation in the collegial and business environment, but it has not done so in the K-12. Of course, I think everyone here has heard about the feud between Governor DeSantis and Walt Disney World, but it's more than just a feud. We're talking about a private business with First Amendment rights that is being punished because they dare to defend LGBTQ+ people and children. Weaponizing government to punish actors that express an opinion that a governor does not like is not only unethical, but it's also undemocratic, and it's a waste of taxpayer dollars, as we have seen Florida spend millions of dollars in lawsuits on unconstitutional and undemocratic policies and actions. Let's not overlook the sustained attacks on public education in the state of Florida. Education is the cornerstone of a prosperous society, empowering individuals with knowledge and skills necessary to success. However, the Republican supermajority has shown to prioritize their own agenda over the well-being and future of our children by using government to censor free thought, ban books, and whitewash history. They've also inserted conservative orthodoxy into the collegial environment, and we have 90+ years Supreme Court precedent to say that's unconstitutional, but it hasn't stopped them from doing that. Most recently with House Bill 999, Senate Bill 266, which not only sets conservative ideology into general education courses in all Florida universities and colleges, but also goes as far to ban any DEI programs at any one of our higher education institutions. New College of Florida offers the canary in the coal mine. Many of you know New College of Florida was once our premier honors college, a public honors college in Florida. It has gone over a conservative hostile takeover with Governor Ron DeSantis appointing one of his allies to become the president, another ally to become the general counsel, and of course has appointed all of his friends to the board of trustees, taking what was once a school that welcomed diversity to one that is now a publicly funded propaganda machine to prop up the ideology of this undemocratic process. Finally, the issue of preemption demands our attention. Preemption, when used judicially, can serve as a valuable tool to establish consistent policies across different jurisdictions. However, in the state of Florida, preemption has been wielded as a weapon against local governments, effectively silencing their voices and creating an environment where local officials don't have the tools or resources to address everyday problems. This heavy-handed approach to demonstrate a disregard for local democracy and a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of state government. Many local elected officials operate in a place of fear, thinking that if they displease or oppose the governor, they will be removed. And whether it's the Florida High School Athletic Association or some of our local expressway authorities to college board of trustees, no entity feels safe operating and expressing their opinions in Florida today, unless it aligns with the governor. So in conclusion, the Republican majority, alongside Governor DeSantis and his allies in the Sunshine State, have compromised the legislative process, eroded individual freedoms, attacked public education, have threatened our economy along the way, and have wielded preemption as a means of control. It is our duty as Americans to shed light on these anti-democratic abuses of power and to advocate for the restoration of democratic principles in the state of Florida. I thank you again for the time and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Representative. State Attorney Warren, you're... Check 1, 2. All right, cool. Thank you, Representative. State Attorney Warren, you're now recognized for 3 minutes to deliver your testimony.
Thank you, Congressman Frost, and good afternoon to the Congressman and other members of the House. My name is Andrew Warren. I'm the duly elected state attorney in Hillsborough County, Florida. Hillsborough County, home to the city of Tampa and 1.5 million Floridians, is a wonderful purple slice of America. I was first elected state attorney in 2016 and re-elected in 2020 with nearly 370,000 votes. Before being elected, I had the privilege and honor of serving as a federal prosecutor with the United States Department of Justice. Thank you for the opportunity today to testify on anti-democratic abuses of power happening in the state of Florida, where I was born and where I returned home to serve my community and raise my 2 beautiful daughters. America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. That quote is often misattributed to Abraham Lincoln, but it's an accurate warning of how fragile our democracy is. This is a perilous time for our nation. President Trump introduced us to modern authoritarianism through divisive rhetoric. He demonizes his detractors and verbally attacks elections, judicial independence, and the rule of law. This all culminated in the January 6th physical attack on this very Capitol. Trump's unique brand of politics has inspired copycats around the country, including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Governor DeSantis has weaponized Trump's authoritarian approach by elevating words into deeds. He's exploited cracks in the system and trampled both the spirit and the letter of the law to punish those who disagree with him. He's attacked businesses, the LGBTQ+ community, teachers, and elected officials, chilling free speech and undermining the foundational principles of our republic. On August 4th, 2022, Governor DeSantis abused his power and illegally suspended me from my position as state attorney. That's not my opinion, that is a fact. A federal judge found that the suspension violated both state and federal law. The judge determined, after a full trial on the merits, that the governor's allegations against me were false and that I had done my job as state attorney extremely well, consistent with how I told my constituents I would. Above all, The judge found that the governor's controlling motivations were, quote, bringing down a reform prosecutor and the political benefit that would result, end quote. My suspension was an unlawful attack on democracy, free speech, and the rule of law. It's just one example of how Governor DeSantis has shown remarkable disdain for the laws he is sworn to uphold. He likes to brag about the so-called free state of Florida, but in my lifetime, the state has never been less free. If you cross the governor, you are at risk of political reprisals. This fear-based, punitive approach to governance should send shivers down the spine of anyone who cares about free speech, fair elections, or the rule of law, three core principles on which American democracy is built. It would be convenient for Governor DeSantis' supporters and others to dismiss my testimony because he and I are from different political parties, which we are, or because I'm frustrated about my suspension, which I am, or because I disagree with many of his policies, which I do. But this is not politics as usual. I disagree with many Republicans and their policies, as well as some Democrats and theirs. But even where we disagree, I know those officials and their policies are not threats to democracy. Governor DeSantis' track record of abusing his power, however, certainly is. Thank you again for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you. Mr. Covey, you are now recognized for 3 minutes to deliver your testimony.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you, Congressman Frost and the members in the House of Representatives for having me here today. My name is Brian Covey, and I'd like to begin by sharing the two most important voices in this story. My daughter wanted you guys to know that taking away all the books was wrong and rude, and she is worried about her friends who like to read with her at school and don't have books at home. My son wanted you to hear that fifth graders have read every book in the school, and there is nothing inappropriate. If there were, my friends and I would have already given it to the teachers, and they would make it disappear. I learned about the complete and sudden removal of all of books from my children's education, walking into a school event during state-sponsored Literacy Week. Teachers were hosting an escape room challenge for parents to walk into each individual into the classroom and answer puzzles to escape. It was a fun event with a book fair where families could purchase books to support the school library. My children explained to me that the school collected all the books that students were currently reading. Classroom libraries were put into storage or covered with bulletin board paper. Students no longer were able to check out books from the library or share books from home. And they removed media guidance resource, where librarians are a consistent educator working on reading comprehension for students 1st through 5th grade. As one Duval County Public School librarian explained it to me, my duty as a media specialist was to stand before my colleagues and instruct them to pull all of their books. I stood before a group of people who I respected deeply, crying, as I watched the shock register transfer to confusion and then anger. It is on my shoulders to physically touch every book in the school library as part of this time-consuming and inefficient county book vetting process. Students had no books, nothing except for textbooks provided by the county. Working in education is a fundamental calling, but here I am serving a voice of a process that I am ashamed of, policing colleagues I trust and admire, and turning my students away. I know that this is wrong, and I question myself constantly, but I keep going. My heart is full in doubt and disgust, but the hard knowledge and pressure that if I don't do this, my students will suffer even more. Becoming a substitute teacher was the beginning of a new career for me. I wanted to be a good teacher, and in October I took over a middle school intensive math vacancy where students proudly boasted that they had already made 2 teachers quit that year. On January 27th, I was told to check out what they did to the middle school library, and when I walked into the library, I was confronted with empty shelves on one side and media equipment turned over to make books inaccessible to students on the other. I took a 17-second video of empty bookshelves to put a visualization to what was happening in Florida public schools and posted it on Twitter. I was optimistic that this was a mistake and emergency measures would be implemented to correct whatever misunderstanding caused this to happen in the middle of a school year. Not once in my advocacy of documenting the reality of books being removed from Duval County Public Schools was addressed with me from the school district or my employer, Education Staffing Solutions. On February 14th, a local reporter asked Governor DeSantis specifically about my video that had 13 million views on Twitter, and he responded, "That video is a fake narrative. That's not true. I think that they're trying to do is virtual signal, and it's all politically motivated." Anytime you hear something so outlandish, just understand they're manufacturing that to try to create a narrative. I worked the next day without a mention of the governor's comments, and that evening I received a 45-second phone call saying that my services were no longer needed from HR in New Jersey. On March 8th, Governor DeSantis held a press conference titled "Exposing the Book Ban Hoax." They started by playing a portion of my empty bookshelves, followed by 5 minutes of pornography that he claimed was being pushed to 10-year-olds all over the country. Within minutes of taking the stage, he declared, "There was that Duval County school video, that they took a video of empty bookshelves and they said, the state of Florida doesn't want books, they are trying to censor books and all that stuff. Turns out that was a hoax. Turned out the individual who did that in the school system was fired." On February 26th, Business Insider published an article where a spokesman for DeSantis responded by saying, "I encourage you to ask Mr. Covey why he lied and felt it was appropriate to politicize this issue. Unfunded mandates are the preferred weapon of political culture wars. Ron DeSantis did not expect a full-time substitute teacher without the fear of losing his teaching certificate, and would recognize and document the historical significance of what was happening in real time. He also did not expect me to have the financial analytic skills to accurately document that this unfunded mandate illegally skipped the Appropriations Committee by saying the implementation would not cost more than $200,000. Along with being a book ban, Florida House Bill 1467 is also an unfunded mandate passing the cost of their own censorship to the schools themselves. The only staff that can approve books are certified media specialists, and principal and school boards are assigned responsibility over all the books in their purview. When the removal of books was implemented, there were 54 certified media specialists to approve 1.6 million titles in Duval County Public Schools. At maximum efficiency, that would allow them 1 minute and 24 seconds to read the book, find and approve online review, and fill out a questionnaire and enter it into the system. In a campaign speech a couple weeks ago, DeSantis said, "You can't have one fraction of society weaponizing the power of the state against a fraction that it doesn't like." While he was referring to the latest Trump indictment, his words are exactly how the book approval mandate was structured. By allowing any parent or resident of the county to challenge any school material, serial book challengers account for 60% of the challenge submissions. On January 25th through June 5th, certified media specialists have diligently worked to review 49,000 books.
Mr. Covey,
Go
thank you so much. We have limited time. Do you mind
Yeah, you're good.
wrapping up? Thank you so much. You can finish.
Oh, yeah. So at the current rate of 14 minutes and 20 seconds per review, it would take 10 years, 3 months, and 9 days for students to have access to the titles that they had on January 1st. The removal of librarians from working with students on reading comprehension had an opportunity cost of the district so far of $1.3 million and would cost an extra $13.8 million to complete.
Thank you so much, Mr. Covey. Ms. Jazzy Byrne-Clark, you're recognized for 3 minutes.
Perfect. Good afternoon, Congressman Frost and members of the House of Representatives. My name is Jasmine Burney Clark. I am the founder and consulting director of Equal Ground Education Fund. And on behalf of Equal Ground Education Fund, a Black-led, community-centered voting rights organization headquartered in Orlando, Florida, working to protect and expand the voting rights of Black Floridians throughout the state, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the importance of safe, fair, and accessible voting in Florida, the new voter suppression laws that have eroded access to the ballot box, and the resulting lawsuits. A lot has been said about Florida over the past few years, and as a native Floridian who has dedicated my personal and professional life to civic engagement, I'd like to start by sharing my personal story of limitations to civic access, representation, and addressing a very important issue that has been plaguing the state of Florida for quite some time now: discriminatory voter suppression. This is a serious issue that deserves our attention and action, and if we are to preserve the integrity of our nation's democracy, it must happen here. Throughout Florida's history, rampant gerrymandering deeply compromised our government by suppressing citizens' rights to elect representatives to Congress fairly. Elected officials were effectively choosing their voters, and voters had no true ability to select the representatives of their choice because elections were predetermined by outlined districts. The year was 1992. I was 6 years old, and Florida's delegation included African American members for the first time since Reconstruction. Specifically, Congressional District 3, a majority-minority racially gerrymandered district snaking across the northern and central parts of Florida. It created a district where African Americans were finally being represented, in which I happened to reside in. The next 30 years of my life, my congressional district would be the center of redistricting and map-drawing debates that have seen multiple rounds of litigation and leaders. And my congressional representation, along with the resources tied to it, would be at stake due to political posturing and racial gerrymandering of Florida legislators. This fall, I will represent Equal Ground and join co-plaintiffs in court to fight once again for restoration of Black congressional representation in the state of Florida. For decades, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 has been instrumental in protecting the rights of all citizens to vote, regardless of their race or ethnicity. However, in recent years, we have seen a disturbing trend of the erosion of the Voting Rights Act, and the wave of new voting laws in Florida that make it harder for us to vote include strict voter ID requirements, limiting early voting, and purging voters from the rolls. These laws have a disproportionate impact on Black and brown voters who face many barriers to voting. Florida has become a breeding ground for voter suppression laws, but no state disenfranchises more voters than the state of Florida. These laws create major obstacles to vote by mail, curtail access to drop boxes, criminalize line warming activities such as providing water to voters standing in line. They also violate the Voting Rights Act and unlawfully abridge voters' rights to voter assistance at polling places from third-party voter registration organizations like mine. In addition, the appointment of an elections police department in 2022 paved the way for voters to be purged from the voting rolls and further prohibit supervisors of elections from being able to effectively do their job and support well-intentioned organizations who desire to see more people engaged in the civic process. Equal Ground recognizes the deep history of racist and suppressive tactics used in this country to disenfranchise Black and brown voters from participating in the electoral process. And the creation of an elections police department is a solution to a problem that does not exist in Florida. We already have safeguards in place to investigate and prosecute those who violate our elections laws. And in a state that prides itself on fiscal responsibility, this new elections police force is a waste of tax dollars. Our political atmosphere has become so polarized and divisive in the state. With voting being the cornerstone of our democracy, we could not in good conscience support any effort that will lead to voters being removed from the voting rolls if they don't vote within a certain time frame. As Americans, there is no expiration on our citizenship, and as such, there should be no expiration on the most sacred right we have to democracy, and that is the right to vote. Voter purges, poll taxes, and partisan gerrymandering make up Florida's notorious reputation for passing restrictive voter suppression laws. It is also important to know that these tactics used in Florida are not unique to our state. Across the country, we have seen a rise in these types of voter suppression tactics. There is a clear attempt to manipulate the democratic process. In conclusion, the issue of voter suppression in Florida is a serious concern that requires our action and our attention. So let me be very clear. Governor DeSantis, his cabinet, and legislators have passed voter suppression laws with the intent to silence Black and brown voters and diminish our voting power. But the single place one can learn about power, its imbalance, and its balance is in books. Books that teach us all about our history of our founding, books that teach us about the chattel slavery that built this country, books that describe the goods and services our ancestors' bodies were sold for, and the books that we have been banned from in hopes that it will diminish the contributions and our significance. We must stand up for the right to vote in any attempt to erode its fundamental right. And once again, I want to say thank you all for your time today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much to all the witnesses. I'm now going to recognize for remarks Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Doing my best Marsha Fudge impression there. But thank you, Maxwell, first and foremost, for convening this incredibly important hearing, for your leadership in the state of Florida, but certainly your leadership here in the United States Congress. It's been bold, it's been fearless, it's been in the spirit of John Lewis and getting into good trouble. And so I'm thankful for that. Thankful for this powerhouse panel that is here to participate, hear from you, and engage in terms of the anti-democratic behavior that has taken place. I think I'm in the New York corner of this panel here with Alex and Dan. But most importantly, I think what we see in Florida that you've outlined in a very compelling way that we're going to continue to highlight is the type of cancer, malignant tumor that we've seen growing across America in terms of these anti-democratic efforts to undermine freedom while we're standing on the side of freedom, whether that's undermining reproductive freedom, undermining the freedom to vote, undermining the freedom to live your life through some of the bullying that we're seeing, particularly as it relates to the trans community, the LGBTQ plus community. And this malignant tumor has to be addressed and cut out, or it will continue to grow and spread and decimate freedoms all across the land. So I just thank you for your presence. Thank you, Maxwell Frost, for your leadership. Thank the members for their presence here today, and look forward to continuing to work together to confront the anti-democratic behavior that has taken place in Florida, as we work to confront the anti-democratic behavior and the extremism that is also spreading like a malignant tumor here in the United States Congress. And as we say in Washington, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leader. I'm honored to have you here, especially as we talk about what's going on in our home state. I'll now recognize Representative Crockett for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Congressman Frost. And for a second, I thought I was listening to what was going on in Texas, my home state, but y'all kept saying Florida, so, we'll go with Florida then. Fundamental to a thriving democracy is an individual's right to vote. Government structures that purport to represent the will of the people, but in fact represent the will of those in power, are nothing more than autocracies. The politicians effectively become dictators. We can all agree that we must ensure our elections are free and fair. But when we talk about illegal or fraudulent voting, it is important that we don't conflate an outlier case with being widespread pandemonium. And, well, in our most recent hearing on this topic, I brought what some would call CVS-length receipts about the fact that Republicans were the ones that were cheating. But the reality is that we know that cheating happens. There is no perfect system. But the idea that it is widespread is something that we must cast out. So, my namesake, Ms. Bernie Clark, yes or no, in your work and experience protecting the right to vote in Florida, have Florida elected officials exaggerated the extent of voter fraud?
Yes, we have seen our governor, legislators, and a few cabinet members exaggerate one or two cases as a mass situation or a mass issue that needs the addressing, to the extent of enacting an entire police task force.
Thank you so much. And who benefits from having the public believe these exaggerations, the people of Florida or the politicians?
Politicians, of course, would benefit from creating mass pandemonium. It electrifies their base, as we assume we're seeing across the state.
To be clear, the Florida legislature has enacted numerous ways to disenfranchise voters and limit democracy itself. After Florida residents voted in favor of Amendment 4 in 2018, a law that overturned prohibiting individuals who had a felony conviction from voting, the Florida legislature worked to limit the effect of this law by then requiring people who had just regained their rights to vote, they now had to pay off fines and fees before voting. Sounds a little familiar to me, something that they used to call a poll tax, but I guess Florida didn't see it that way. And if they didn't pay their fines and voted, these individuals risked being arrested and going back to prison. This policy, in addition to Governor DeSantis' recently established election police, do nothing more than intimidate and deter eligible voters who fear that their misunderstanding on whether they qualify to vote will result in exorbitant fines and possible incarceration. Ms. Bernie Clark is violently arresting people who mistakenly vote, the typical type of enforcement of a violation of election laws.
So no, that is not the type of behavior we would typically see in an alleged elections fraud case. This is inhumane, and folks have been treated like animals through the process. It's not something we see on a normal basis.
Thank you so much. Rep. Escamani, what impact have you seen from the creation of the election police as it relates to voter suppression and disengagement? And where do you think Congress can engage to limit the harm these actions are causing?
Well, thank you so much, Congressman, for the question. And to echo Ms. Bernie Clark's excellent remarks, we're seeing an environment where now returning citizens, even those that are eligible to vote, are scared to vote. And if anyone saw the body camera footage from these arrests that took place, many of which have already been tossed out as not being legitimate, it is predominantly black and brown people, it is predominantly people of low wealth, and they are confused because they have no idea why they're being arrested, to the point where even the law enforcement officers have no idea why they're being arrested. So I really do think there could be oversight and accountability. There really has not been an investigative arm into what were the conversations between FDLE and the governor's office on this. In fact, I made records requests that have still not been fulfilled by different leaders within these institutions because there are still so many unanswered questions of how this happened. And of course, I think follow-up to who might be next is also very important.
Thank you so much. Although today's hearing focuses on Florida, it is important to remember that efforts like this are being contemplated in states all across the country, including my home state of Texas. Congress must work to ensure that all persons' constitutional rights to vote are protected from anti-democratic state leaders across the country. And the last thing that I want to say is thank you, Congressman Frost, for embodying the essence of what MLK meant when he said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and that's exactly what we see. Thank you so much to each of the witnesses for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now recognize Representative Connolly.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Frost, for bringing us together and hearing the whole story. It's chilling. I thought I was hearing descriptions of Kim Il-jung's North Korea. So, Representative Escamani, let's do a little game here. I'd like you to just identify who said these quotes. Ready?
Ready.
The last thing we need to do is monkey this up by trying to embrace a socialist agenda with huge tax increases and bankrupting the state. Who said that?
Governor Ron DeSantis.
Correct. The left wants to control, they want to dictate, and they want to impose their ideology on you. Who said that?
Governor Ron DeSantis.
Correct again. We must not be misled by left-wing incompetent news media that day after day feed us a diet of fantasy, telling us that we are bigots, racists, and hate mongers. Who said that?
Governor Ron DeSantis.
Wrong. That was George Wallace.
Oh.
But it sounds like Ron DeSantis, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
See, there are a couple of trick ones in here. The radical left wants to defund the police and undermine public safety, but we won't let that happen. Who said that?
Governor Ron DeSantis is what it
That's
sounds
right.
like.
What about this one? The left has no respect for law and order. They only seek to impose their radical agenda through violence and chaos. Who said that?
Governor Ron DeSantis.
No.
Who said
Again,
that
another
one?
trick one. That was dictator Augusto Pinochet from Chile, who overthrew the longest surviving democratic elected government in South America back in 1976.
Wow.
All right, I know, they sound similar. Put on the full armor of God, stand firm against the left's schemes. You will face flaming arrows, but if you have the shield of faith, you will overcome them. Who said that?
I'm pretty sure that one was Governor Ron DeSantis.
That's right. I am the son of the soil and a servant of God. Who said that?
I don't want to guess on that one.
That's Saddam Hussein.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Okay, well, I've been chosen by God to save this place from chaos and anarchy. My task is to restore order and defend the true values of our society. Who said that?
I'm not sure of that one.
All right, well, that's really a tricky one. It sounds a lot like Ron DeSantis, but it was actually one of his, I think, probably models. Francisco Franco, fascist and
Right.
dictator of Spain,
Right.
who, of course, crushed democratic government in Spain in a civil war. I do all of that because when listening to you and reading statements by the governor of Florida, one is really struck with the eerie resemblance, both in behavior and words, to dictators and fascists throughout the ages in the last 100 years. And it is chilling, and it should never happen in America. So I am really glad, Congressman Frost, that you brought us together, and I hope we take this show on the road. More people need to hear this. More people to understand the full picture of what is happening. This is truly the deconstruction of democratic society.
Right.
And whether it's 49,000 books, whether it's taking away voting rights, whether it's actually removing duly elected officials because you don't agree with what they're doing or saying, and of course, the suppression of democratic practices within the elected state legislature itself. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for enlightening us. And we look forward to working with you to bring the word to the broader American public and to changing the dynamics in Florida. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman. And I thank my friend, Ms. Porter, for yielding to me.
Yes, thank you so much, Representative. We're actually going to recognize Representative Debbie Wasserson-Schultz, Dean of our delegation, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Congressman Frost, for convening this important hearing, and it's good to see you. Representative Escamani, we go back many, many years, all the way to when you were in college.
That's right.
And it's great to see you here in your rightful place of power.
Thank you.
And the rest of you, especially State Attorney Warren, I feel like I want to strap on my body armor and go to bat for you because we are appreciative of how hard you pushed back and the reign of terror that you have been swept up in. I'm really pleased to be able to follow my colleague, Congressman Connolly, building on his theme of fascism. As a former member of the House Committee on Oversight, I certainly understand the style that this committee operates in, and we all know that fascism and anti-Semitism are on the rise in this country, especially in Florida. And we also know that one of the chief perpetrators of hateful fascist rhetoric and policies in Florida is our Governor, Ron DeSantis. Fascism is the antithesis of democracy, and it can be defined in 3 simple characteristics. 1, fascism stresses the glory of the state and unquestioning obedience to its leader, like a sheepish state legislature who blindly follows and emboldens the MAGA extremist policies of its imperial governor. 2, it erases diverse thought, like banning of diverse books, squelching free speech, and erasing neglected histories from elementary schools to college campuses. And 3, it harshly suppresses dissent, like criminalizing protest or firing those who do not blindly agree with policies that harm women, as well as marginalize, demonize, or harm minorities or the powerless. Now, don't just take my word for it. Each of the Floridians on the panel today can attest that all 3 elements are gleefully met by Governor Ron DeSantis and his far right-wing supporters in the state legislature. What is most terrifying is what happens as a result of this fascism. Fascist regimes lead to mass violence towards all communities. But we've seen a specific group targeted in Florida. According to the Anti-Defamation League, hate crimes against Jews in Florida have risen 300% since 2012. Representative Escamani, you posted a video of a demonstration outside of Disney World 2 weeks ago. Can you describe that demonstration briefly?
Yes, Congresswoman, it's also good to see you. It was a really horrifying video to share, honestly. It was a group of maybe 10 to 12 individuals, mostly wearing masks, holding swastikas and other signs that were anti-Semitic in nature, and they were essentially standing outside the Walt Disney World welcome sign in Orlando.
And just yesterday, we had similar hate sprayed on sidewalks in Hallandale Beach in my district. We've had it happen in my own hometown of Weston, on the side of stadiums in Jacksonville. There's not an isolated example of hate. This is rampant, spreading across the state of Florida. Again, Representative Escamani, has Governor DeSantis vocally condemned his supporters who engaged in this blatant display of anti-Semitism?
Well, Congresswoman, I should add to your point that these individuals were also, one of them is at least holding a sign that said DeSantis 2024. And so a comment from the governor is warranted, and to this point, there has been no response.
Shocking. And my time is short, so to all the witnesses, quickly, do you believe that discrimination, violence, hate, or other extremism against diverse communities are on the rise in Florida?
Yes.
Yes. And do you believe that the powerful right-wing leaders who are best situated to denounce such extremism have adequately repudiated or challenged it?
Absolutely not.
I agree. I want to be crystal clear here, and I apologize that I'm going to have to hop out because we're in the middle of an appropriations markup, and the only advantage to having a last name at the end of the alphabet is when you vote near the end in Congress. So I'll be crystal clear. Silence is complicity. When groups in a weak position are attacked and those in power fail to vocally denounce it, that dangerous inaction is an action. And it is a dangerous, harmful inaction that vulnerable people simply cannot endure more of. And shining a white-hot spotlight, as you have today, and brought our oversight Democrats together to do that, ably so by Congressman Goldman, by Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman Porter, Congressman Mfume. This committee really straps on the battle armor every single day and pushes back on the lies, vitriol, and I have an opportunity to sit on the select subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, which, as says Mr. Goldman, which is itself a weapon, a weaponizing government, and so making sure we take every opportunity to be able to shine a spotlight on the extremism, fascism, and squelching of freedom and people's rights in our state, perpetrated and led by our governor, is so critical. Thank you, Congressman Frost. Thank you for the indulgence, and thank you to our guests. And forgive me for having to come in.
No. Thank you so much. We'll now recognize Congresswoman Katie Porter.
Ron DeSantis says a lot of things. Representative Escamani, I want to ask you about some other quotes from Governor DeSantis. And I think the purpose of Mr. Connolly's questions was to illustrate that there's a lot of disagreement. But I want to offer you these quotes and see whether you would support them or not. Ron DeSantis said that we, quote, need a full accounting of payments that are made with our tax dollars. Do you agree with that statement?
I think that's a fair statement, but doesn't happen under his leadership.
Why is an accounting of what happens with our tax dollars a value that you share? Why is that important?
When we are representing our constituents, they are expecting us to deliver results and to spend their money in a responsible way.
Governor DeSantis also said, quote, sunlight is the best disinfectant, quote, for government. Do you agree with that statement?
I would, and ironically, Florida has some of the best public records laws in the country, but DeSantis is also eroding those.
What do Public Records Act and sunlight provisions, why are they important?
They're important because they provide the public with access to information and can also help us uncover corruption and unethical behavior or expenditures.
So we have a governor from Florida who says that we should know what happens with our tax dollars and that sunlight is a disinfectant that can help prevent corruption in government. So this year, Governor DeSantis, armed with these apparently core values of his, signed a new law pertaining to disclosure of his state travel records. Representative Escamani, what does this law do?
This law essentially puts in the shadows the governor's travel records. So as he campaigns across the country and potentially is using public money to do so, we don't have access to information to hold him accountable.
Wait, but I thought that sunlight, Governor DeSantis said that sunlight was the best disinfectant and that we needed to have a full accounting of our tax dollars. Are you saying this law decreases transparency?
Yes, this law not only decreases transparency, but it also is a waste of public money because we can't even know what money, how much is being spent on his out-of-state travel.
And so I just want to be clear, this law applies to whom? This restricts transparency for which Florida officials?
So specifically Governor Ron DeSantis or other people that he appoints to have that same privacy.
Well, wow. I was confused because I thought Governor DeSantis was in favor of transparency. I mean, I guess people can change their minds, but this seems more like he's a hypocrite. The quotes from Governor DeSantis, this is the very same person who gives these quotes when he's trying to gin up political power and persuade Floridians that they can trust him, but then on the back end is signing laws to exempt himself from the very accountability that he trumpets. Again, that's the very definition of hypocrisy, is saying one thing and then doing another. I'm going to propose a slogan for Governor DeSantis' office. Transparency for thee, but not for me. Does that slogan describe the governor's behavior with regard to this law?
I would say yes, Congresswoman, and to echo your point, it's a constant process of projection. And to some of the quotes that were also shared by Mr. Connolly echo that point where he says he cares about one thing, but he does the complete opposite. And we see that projection in almost all of his rhetoric and all of his policies.
So Governor DeSantis, transparency for thee, but not for me. This is a pretty catchy slogan, and it's also truthful. But I'm going to bet that he doesn't adopt it. You know why? Because constituents, voters, the American people hate hypocrisy from politicians. They expect better from their elected leaders, Republican or Democrat. The American people value transparency. They value people whose actions match their words. So there has to be another reason. This kind of hypocrisy is terrible politics. I mean, we all know that, Democrat or Republican. Nobody campaigns on being a hypocrite. So there's got to be another reason why Governor DeSantis would pass a law that shields his use of taxpayer dollars from disclosure. Why does he want to hide information about his travel and his meetings from the public?
Well, he operates under an environment of maintaining power and exerting control. And the more you can hide information from the public, then the less they know. And our ability to hold you accountable is lessened. And so it really is a tactic to maintain power and control.
So by decreasing transparency, is he weakening or strengthening the protection of taxpayer dollars in Florida?
Weakening.
So my transparency in taxpayer-funded Travel Act would prevent wasteful spending by shining a light on how our federal elected leaders are spending our money. We have some of these same issues here in Congress with our official travel. It would require us to disclose when, where, and why, and who is using taxpayer dollars to travel. If we enacted something like this in Florida, would that legislation help the governor potentially stop him from being wasteful and save Floridians dollars?
It potentially could.
And would that also strengthen democracy, and if so, how?
Yes. Not only would it strengthen democracy, but it would allow for the public to have more trust in their elected officials, which at this point has been eroded over the past decades, and leaders like Governor DeSantis make it worse.
So Governor DeSantis makes it clear in his public statements that he wants America to be like Florida. So if the state of Florida were to set a better example on this by actually disclosing his travel, maybe we would have more momentum here in Congress to pass something like the Transparency in Taxpayer-Funded Travel Act. I guess the old saying is right. Democracy really does die in darkness. When politicians tell us that they'll be transparent, but then cover their tracks, they're not just hypocrites. They're hypocrites who have free rein to use their positions for personal gain rather than public service. I would tell Governor DeSantis that there is only one way out of this. Bring some sunshine back to the Sunshine State. I yield back.
Thank you so much. We'll now recognize Representative Mfume.
Thank you very much. Representative Frost, I want to also commend you on holding this hearing, for gathering these witnesses and bringing before this Congress again the issue that we all care so much about, and that is voting rights, voting rights, and voting rights. And I want to talk a bit, if I might, about the state of Florida, because I think if you've lived long enough, you'll see everything twice, and I feel like I'm going through this for the second time. Ms. Bernie Clark, I just want to say to you, you'd mentioned in your comments how there was this great breakthrough in 1992. After work on the ground all over the place, African Americans, Latinos, others, just to be able to make sure that the past history of Florida was no longer replicated. And then in 1992, there was a breakthrough. The issue for me is that in 1986, we were doing the same thing around the country, and I, as a much younger person, and we were hoping to have breakthroughs in several states. And I got elected in Maryland. John Lewis got elected in Georgia. Nancy Pelosi got elected in California. Joe Kennedy got elected in Massachusetts. And yet, all of the hope and prayers that we had for Florida that year did not happen. And it did not happen in the next election in 1988 because of the difficulties to get a fair process in place. It didn't happen in 1990. So you're right, in 1992, there was a historic breakthrough. And Florida sent to the Congress Alcee Hastings, Corrine Brown, and Carrie Meeks. It was unheard of. No other state did that in that year. And so there was a great deal of hope and belief that the history of Florida and voting and the ability of people to have that vote protected was in fact changing. And then we got to 2000 and the hanging chads. And I remember that, and some of you here will remember all that we went through when Vice President Gore came to grips with the fact that the history of voting in Florida was still tainted. No one had heard of a hanging chad before. I was president of the NAACP that time. I convened hearings on the ground because we were pushing Janet Reno, who was the AG at the time, to do something about it, and justice was slow to act, so we took and convened hearings with young people all over the state, only to come up with volumes and volumes of instances and descriptions of voting irregularities that had existed then. In the previous election they existed, and if they were not corrected, would continue to exist. The volume of that information is still somewhere in the Justice Department today, sitting on a shelf. And so, as we all know, Al Gore won the popular vote that year, but lost the electoral vote by 500 votes because of the situation in Florida and the hanky-panky that took place in between election night, when he was declared the winner, and the ultimate outcome when the Supreme Court decided in a 5-4 decision, no, you are not the winner. And yes, the situation in Florida shall take precedent. So some of us remember the bitterness of that. That's why I really am invigorated seeing all of you with this good fight. It is a good fight. Leader Jeffries referenced it earlier. It is a real good fight. Please don't give up, and don't live long enough like me to see it happen again. That we owe it to the generations behind us to make sure that this is done away with. I'm hoping, because I look at all of you and I see in your eyes the ability to want to fight on. Ron DeSantis is just the current boogeyman. There will be others if we allow his way to dictate and to prevail. And that's why it is so important that you do what you do. That's why I have so much respect for Max Frost, coming in at the age of 25 and leading in a way that says, if this is our time, we will not be dissuaded. And so maybe at long last, we see a situation in Florida where the state, because of you, will be launched, hopefully on an unalterable course with a firm determination. that the legacy of the past shall not dictate the legacy of the future. It's a very simple set of propositions that I urge all of you to continue to speak to in your own spheres of influence. Every vote counts, and every vote must be counted. And then the other side of that is to remind people wherever you can that people who do not vote have no line of credit with the people who are elected, and therefore they pose no threat to those who work daily like Ron DeSantis against their best interest. I'm heartened, Mr. Chair, to be here. I'm glad that this is taking place. I'm glad you convened it. My congratulations to all of you. I see you as soldiers in a real valiant struggle to bring about change. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Goldman.
Thank you, Congressman Frost, for convening this. Thank to all our witnesses for coming here today. You know, I'm sitting here listening to your opening statements, listening to my colleagues, and especially Congresswoman Porter talking about hypocrisy. And I'm struck by a notification that I just received on another one of my committees here, the so-called Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, where we have had several hearings on so-called violations of the First Amendment and censorship on social media. Now, apparently, in a couple weeks, we're going to have another hearing on so-called censorship, where the government was working with social media companies to ensure that foreign actors did not interfere in our elections and blatant misinformation was not distributed, undermining public health. And here we are today in a hearing about a governor who has banned books, who has banned the use of the term gay and any discussion in school about identity, who has chilled free speech through the firings and terminations and threats and bullying. All of this is content-based restrictions, which is a blatant violation of the First Amendment. And so what we are seeing from the National Republican Party is hypocrisy at its very zenith. And the transparency for thee but not for me can also be extended to free speech for me but not for thee. And First Amendment for me but not for thee. It is chilling, it is dangerous, and it is affront to our individual rights. And I am hearkened to compare some of what's going on in your state of Florida to what we see in Hungary. And Viktor Orban, who was and rose to power in the early 90s and has slowly and methodically turned Hungary into an authoritarian regime. And he's done it with many of the same tactics that we are seeing through Governor DeSantis in Florida. For decades, Orban waged a war against the independence of the Hungarian judiciary and has had some recent success. And it's become so alarming that senior Hungarian judges have gone on record to publicly raise the concerns about him meddling in the judiciary. He has now, of course, become a darling of many on the right. He was even invited to speak at the CPAC conference last year. But this is the playbook that we're seeing Governor DeSantis use. We're seeing anti-LGBTQ laws that are central to the hateful anti-democratic ideologies that he espouses. And he even uses so much of the same rhetoric, especially the anti-Semitic tropes, referencing George Soros, the phrase woke, which seems to describe everything that Governor DeSantis doesn't like. And finally, what I want to focus on for a couple minutes today is what happened to you, Mr. Warren. Governor DeSantis removed you from office for expressing your objection to criminalizing abortion and your prosecutorial discretionary decision not to do so. Is that more or less accurate as to what transpired in his removal of you?
It is, Congressman. What the court found was that although the governor highlighted a speech that I had made and other protected activity under the First Amendment as the ostensible reason for my suspension, what the court found was that it was actually just a pretext, that the governor wanted to suspend me, as I said before, for politics and for publicity.
And Ms. Escamani, you've also described how now there's been new laws and put in place that would allow people to be, from the legislature, to be expelled for relatively minor infractions. Is that accurate?
Correct, yeah. House rules were amended, and the supermajority voted to approve them with all Democrats opposing.
And Mr. Warren, you raised a good point, which is that, and I think it's very important, because we have to depend on our judiciary to uphold the rule of law. And this is not an allegation that you've made about the reason why Governor DeSantis removed you. This is a finding by the court. And I understand there was some action yesterday in your case. Is that right?
Actually, just this morning we learned. Yes.
What can you tell us what happened?
Well, I'm not totally sure because I haven't had the opportunity to read the court's opinion. But during my walk over this morning, I was informed that the Florida Supreme Court had dismissed the state action challenging the governor's actions.
The state, so there's a separate lawsuit?
Yes, sir. We had filed in federal court, and that case is currently on appeal to the 11th Circuit. We also filed a petition with the Florida Supreme Court, and earlier this morning, it's my understanding that the Florida Supreme Court dismissed that action.
And that Florida Supreme Court, as I understand it, has been stacked with DeSantis appointments over the past several years. Is that right?
That's correct.
It's alarming. I'm a fellow former federal prosecutor like yourself. In my 10 years, unlike you, I never did receive the Attorney General Award for trial litigation, so I congratulate you on that. And you clearly are an exemplary prosecutor who a court found was doing your job that you were elected by your constituents to do. And Governor DeSantis didn't like the job that you were doing, disagreed with your discretionary decisions, and removed a duly elected official from office because of a simple policy disagreement. And it is eerie, as we sit here today, potentially having a vote in Congress over whether or not President Biden should be impeached, similarly because Republicans don't like his policies. And if we are going to descend into a country where our policy disagreements lead to the removal of officials, the anti-democratic removal of officials, and the effort to impeach and remove cabinet officials or presidents, we are descending further and further into authoritarianism. And it is striking to me when we have a Republican Party whose platform in the 2020 presidential election was to support Donald Trump, that has no more meaningful, promising policy ideas that can successfully persuade voters in this country, that instead of trying to use the marketplace of ideas and the First Amendment to persuade people as to support their positions, they are simply trying to eradicate the views of their opponents. And it is scary. It is something that Viktor Orban and other despots and authoritarians around the world have done. And we must continue to root out this kind of behavior and to bring light to it. And I thank Congressman Frost for holding this hearing so that we can hear from you and we can lift up the experiences that Florida is seeing in dealing with its own fascist movement. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you. Now recognize Representative Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Frost, for convening us today in what is one of the front lines of democracy in the United States and our ability to defend that. I also want to thank today's witnesses for coming to testify today. Each of your testimony sheds light on the extreme abuse of power and the anti-democratic advancement that we are seeing happening in the state of Florida. And I want to talk about this a little bit in detail because what is happening in Florida cuts to the core of our democracy. And when we talk about hypocrisy coming from either Ron DeSantis or even what we are seeing in the Republican state party in Florida, is for all of their talk about authoritarianism and socialism and this, that, and the third, the fact of the matter is they are the ones that are engaged in the erosion of courts, in the attack on the independence of our courts, in overturning the people's will. Each and every one of us here as elected officials, the only reason we are here is because the people of this country elected us to be here. Not because we want to be, not because we forced our way here, but because everyday citizens in the United States had the opportunity to not just elect and select their representation, but to also advance the law and have the opportunities to do so on a state level with ballot initiatives and more. So I want to dig into what happens when Governor DeSantis or the Republican Party doesn't like what the people of Florida have to say about their own governance and what they want to do. In the November 2022 election, Orange County residents in Florida voted to approve rent control, policy solution that addresses some of the ongoing housing crises plaguing this country, but especially in Orange County. In fact, Orange County residents had reported rent raises of up to $500, $600, even rent increases by $1,000 a month leading up to the initiative. And so this initiative passed by nearly 60%. Representative Escamani, do you recall how Governor DeSantis and the legislative branches responded to the people of Florida instituting rent control in Orange County?
Absolutely, and as an Orange County resident and a renter myself, I can tell you that just on the ground, there was a huge push by the corporate special interests to combat this, to tell voters to vote no. And despite all the money that was spent in telling us to vote no, as you noted, voters approved it overwhelmingly because the rent is too high. Mm-hmm. And what the legislature did when we convened this past session was preempt, essentially say that no local government could put into place any type of these ordinances. And I should stress that this was an emergency ordinance that would only exist for 1 year. Mm. And even that was preempted by the legislature, and the governor signed that bill into law.
So when everyday Floridians came together to organize and put up a ballot initiative for a vote, they weren't forcing this through, they came together as a community, voted by 60% to institute this policy, just because Ron DeSantis and a very corporate-friendly Republican legislature decided they did not like what Floridians did, they simply overturned it, correct?
Correct.
Now, let's talk about a couple of other initiatives that Ron DeSantis has overturned. It's my understanding that since 2006, the Florida Constitution decided to require a 60% threshold, a supermajority, for citizen-led state constitutional amendments. Despite that supermajority threshold, however, there have been several successful ballot initiatives happening in the state of Florida. Everyday people coming together in the state, trying to govern in the spirit of our democracy. We have seen ballot initiatives passed, including a minimum wage increase, which passed by 60.82%. Voting rights restoration for people with felonies, which passed by 64% in the state of Florida. And reforms to redrawing political districts, which also passed, Floridians supported at the ballot box by a whopping 62.59%. Now, Ms. Bernie Clark, following the overwhelming support that Floridians had for these ballot initiatives, passing them at the ballot box, voting to institute them into law, how did Ron DeSantis react to that? What did they do?
So there are two ways that our legislature and Ron DeSantis responded to that. And the first is that there has been a multi-year introduction of a bill that would increase the threshold from 60% to 66.67%. This arbitrary number is a number that has been decided because of the ballot initiatives that have passed so far have not exactly reached that threshold, but they have come close to reaching it. Ironically, in the state of Florida, it only takes 50 plus 1% for you to become elected, but it requires a supermajority to pass bills or pass laws that actually impact the lives of the folks every single day. And the second thing is that if a bill or a law has been passed by a ballot initiative, our government will then come in and either preempt or create another law that makes it incredibly difficult for the original ballot initiative to be implemented in our state. So there are two ways that folks are being attacked by this threshold increase.
So everyday Floridians have been exercising their right to democracy. They have voted overwhelmingly and organized at the ballot box to institute minimum wage. And Ron DeSantis tries to preempt and overturn minimum wage. Floridians tried to come together in order to get housing costs under control. And what does Ron DeSantis and what does Governor DeSantis and the Republican Party in Florida do? Overturn it. Then we're seeing voting rights restoration. We are seeing redrawing of and trying to check extreme gerrymandering. And what Governor DeSantis is doing is overriding the will of Floridians. And that at the core is what we need to talk about today. Because frankly, it does not matter what end of the political spectrum you are on in the United States. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, a Republican, if you're red or blue, if you're woke or asleep. I don't care. The point is that when the people speak at the ballot box, that their will is honored and that the policies and officials that they support at the ballot box get instituted by our government. And we should all be very, very concerned when an elected official takes a seat of power and when everyday people vote to have a certain outcome at the ballot box, he takes it. Ron DeSantis takes it upon himself and say, Floridians, I know what's better for you than what you do. I'm going to take away the power of your voice at the ballot box. I'm going to take your power away that you have over your own body. I'm going to take your power away of your ability to be a full citizen and have your voting rights honored in the United States. This should wake everybody up, independent of political affiliation. And for anyone who wants to wield this political scepter of so many people who come to the United States, come to our shore in order to escape the perils of authoritarianism, just look to Ron DeSantis to look at what people are escaping as a model from what is happening in other countries. And with that, I yield back. Thank you, Representative Frost.
Thank you so much. I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Covey, you were a substitute teacher in Florida as the book ban laws were being implemented. You posted a video of empty bookshelves to show what was going on. Why did you post that video?
I knew the historical perspective of what I was witnessing, and I couldn't believe that this was the reality in my kids' education. Again, the night before I had seen it as we did a school-sponsored Literacy Week event, and that next day when I walked into the library and saw empty shelves, I had people that had said it wasn't really happening in Florida, and people outside of Duval County specifically didn't believe it. So I posted the video, and
you posted the video, and what did you expect to happen when you posted that video and you got over 14 million views on it? What did you expect to happen?
I was just trying to put a visualization to what was happening in Duval County Public Schools. I didn't put much thought into it actually going viral because I did say, y'all wanna.
The reality is, Florida Governor DeSantis has called your video a fake narrative, and it led to you being fired. What, 2 days after you posted it? Or a few
The day
days
after.
The day after you posted it. And the reality is, you're not the only teacher in the state of Florida to be fired for expressing their views that are contrary to the Florida governor. I also want to move over and talk about the Florida New College, which is the canary in the coal mine with this whole issue of fascism in the state. Representative Escamani, you've lived in Orlando your whole life. You've been a state rep for 5 years. Before Governor DeSantis took office, what was the reputation of the New College of Florida?
I actually had the honor of hiring so many New College graduates before I ran for office when I was at Planned Parenthood because they're some of the best students you'll meet. They're innovative, creative, and New College offers an alternative for a lot of our students that maybe don't fit into a traditional college environment. Every student does a thesis. It's very research heavy. And so it's always been known as one of our unique and also high achieving universities.
Yeah, and I'm so familiar with New College too because for the last 5 years I've actually gone and performed there with my band at one of their student music festivals, and it is a beautiful campus. But would you say the campus itself naturally might be a bit more liberal? Would you say? The students.
Yes, and also smaller. And I think one reason why they were an easy target for Governor DeSantis is because the alumni base of New College compared to, for example, UCF, where I'm a graduate of, which has upwards of 68,000 students today compared to New College, it's known to be an inclusive and welcoming school. It's also known to be a smaller school with a smaller alumni base.
Yeah, it has a student body of less than 700 students. So we have a college, maybe, most of the student base disagrees with the way DeSantis has been governing. It's their First Amendment right. And for people who don't know, too, actually, Gonzalez, who was one of the founders of the March for Our Lives movement from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, actually graduated from Florida New College as well, just to show some of the amazing education they're doing there. So DeSantis is looking to impose his will on a college to make example of a university or college in the state, and he picked the New College for a specific reason. And it's like you said, Representative, because it was a small college that he believed he could pick on. So then he initiated this hostile takeover of the university where he used the powers of the governor, where the governor is able to essentially dismiss a member of the Board of Trustees. DeSantis went ahead and fired the entire Board of Trustees and implemented cronies and lapdogs in there. Is that something that's normal in your tenure with the state legislature? Have you seen a governor or the governor do that before?
Absolutely not. It is not normal. And in fact, it seemed like he intentionally waited for those positions to become empty to do a sweep of appointments at the same time. And of course, the Board of Trustees by statute, it's appointed by the governor, and the other half is appointed by the Board of Governors, who are also appointed by the governor. So, I mean, there's no check and balances in this process either.
Absolutely not. And, changing the leadership at Florida New College was just the first step in moving to change the ideological diversity that the school has. That Board of Trustees then fired the president of the school. And what did they do right after that?
Put into place an ally of the governor, a former Speaker of the House, and Department of Education Commissioner Richard Corcoran.
Did he have any experience being the president of a university or higher ed?
Of course not, but they did cushion him with upwards of $1 million annual salary.
Exactly. They took the salary of the president, used to be $305,000 a year, and it moved to be about $700,000 a year salary, plus other benefits that equal about $1 million a year. So they changed the entire Board of Trustees. They install a new lapdog crony as the president, and then the legislature does a very quick appropriation of money to that university. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There was an LBR meeting hosted, which is kind of an ad hoc budget committee meeting, and upwards of $10 million was allocated to New College. I mean, there were actually many allocations towards New College during last session, basically a free, flexible money, which other universities don't even benefit from.
And you've advocated for money and appropriations in the Florida State Legislature for 5 years. Have you ever been able or seen people be able to move money like that towards a university in such a quick way?
No. And when I asked the chairman of the Education Appropriations Committee for Higher Education why this money was being allocated this way, he could not answer any of my questions.
One of the governor's new appointees, Christopher Rufo, said, quote, we will be shutting down low-performing, ideological captured academic departments and hiring new faculty. The student body will be recomposed over time. Some current students will self-select out, others will graduate, and will recruit new students who are mission-aligned, end quote. What do you think mission-aligned means, Representative?
For me, it speaks to not just a propaganda machine, but they're essentially creating an environment where only some speech is welcome, and this is a public university.
So millions and millions are sent to this university so they can, and as I understand, they're planning on using a lot of this money to advertise, to specifically get more conservative students in there to change the composition of this university. That is so near and dear to so many people's hearts. State Attorney Warren, you have been practicing law for a long time and have a distinguished career. Have you seen a governor use their powers like this before?
Only in North Korea.
One of the core tenets of democracy is respect for fundamental freedoms established in the Constitution. The activity that we're seeing DeSantis engage in, whether it's with colleges or through the state legislature, or his ability to take his cabinet and have them call people and issue threats, is this something that you think is, number one, the job of a governor? Do you think it's such a job of a governor?
No, I don't.
You were taken out of office for, number one, doing your job, exercising your discretion, and also your First Amendment right. We have a substitute teacher here, Brian Covey, who was fired for posting a video. We have a state representative who has been one of our bold progressive fighters in Tallahassee, fighting for a long time, who's spoken to how not normal this is. And then we have Jasmine Burney Clark here, who's been fighting to ensure that voting rights and that democracy is preserved in Florida. State Representative Ana Escamani, would you say that the actions of the governor among all of these equate to fascist ideology?
Absolutely.
And why would you say that?
If you look at the definition of fascism and just this intentional radicalization, fear-mongering, and then, of course, clear consolidation of power and explicit use of control, it checks all those boxes.
I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank my colleagues for joining me on this oversight hearing for two things: to call attention to the shocking abuses of power in Florida, to stop the spread of fascism by showing the world the truth. I want to thank the witnesses for your enlightened testimony. We only had 4 people here today, but we know that we could fill this entire room, the entire chamber, with people who have been personally impacted in the state of Florida by this authoritarian governor and government in Florida that's abusing their power. The actions of Governor DeSantis, it's not politics as usual, like State Attorney Warren brought up. The enabling, aiding, and abetting of the Florida legislature is not politics as usual. In America, democracy is not the kind of thing that we can agree to disagree on. If we don't call attention to the consolidation of power, the abuse of power, and the punishment of dissent, then we allow it to become normalized. Today we heard about many different issues, and I want to say Florida is my home. It's where my community lives, the people I love. I will not give up on this state. Fascism spreads during times of uncertainty, exploiting people's fears and dissatisfaction. Leaders exploit these fears and promise that loyal people to that leader will be able to solve their problems. Fascist leaders don't want to solve real problems. They want to exploit fake problems to get power. And that's exactly what we see going on in the state of Florida. When your goal is power, that you will do anything to create an illusion that you're the savior, including recklessly passing laws you know are unconstitutional, frantically removing any opposition by suppressing votes, banning free thought, removing elected officials, using the military to legitimize your cause and support violence, that is fascism. And we are seeing it in the state of Florida. But like it was said before, it's not just in the state of Florida. It's growing across this country and globally. And it is up to us as members of Congress, as advocates, organizers, representatives, to continue to fight against it. Today, we have just begun to scratch the surface of the dangers of this growing trend of fascism in the state of Florida. Violence and hate crimes are increasing. There is more oversight to come. I really appreciate everybody being here today. And with that, we will end this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.